By Larry Hannett, history professor.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Hannett. Just press. Speak. Put it really closer.
Okay, you know, the great thing about this is that what was happening just before the First World War, and around the time of the First World War, when this important and really significant events occurred, was that the Canadian government, a conservative government at the time of Robert Borden, was totally fixated upon the idea of serving British imperialism wherever it was in trouble. And a memorable politician out of Quebec, but somebody who ought to be remembered better, Henri Bourassa, said at the time, before the First World War, that if Canadian troops were sent every place where British imperialism was in trouble and where the British demanded help, we would be constantly engaged in imperialist war forever, everywhere in the world. And that was his, Bourassa said, this is a recipe for Canadian involvement in a world sense in disaster after disaster. Now the thing about the contemporary situation today is that's precisely what Stephen Harper, another conservative prime minister, is intent upon making happen in Canada as well. And that is different imperialist power, this time US imperialism, but precisely the same situation. He is intent upon bringing Canadians to serve wherever US imperialism is in difficulty. And as we know, this is happening worldwide, from Afghanistan to Iraq. Now they're planning war in Mali. They've actually sort of got a UN authorization to do that. The campaign against Iran is constant. So if we don't say no, if we don't say on y va pas à Siberie, like the 259th Battalion members said, if we don't say we will not participate in these imperialist wars, we will be marshaled into every single one that US imperialism is going to find itself in. We must remember that slogan and keep it constant. We will not go to Iran, we will not go to Siberia, no, we will not go to Mali, we will not go to any of these tous ces guerres impérialistes, all these imperialist wars.
Bravo, bravo, thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Would either of the two women who are here would like to speak on this point with to offer some gender parity to our speakers list today?
Next year.
That will be next year. The representatives from the Raging Grannies will be joining us. Okay, so
all the way down Fort to Government, following the route the soldiers took, past the Empress Hotel, and then Belleville and around the waterfront through James Bay, culminating right in front of the Coast Guard station on Dallas Road, which is the site of the old Rithet's Wharf or Outer Wharf. And that will be the culmination of our march.
And that's where they stayed for many hours.
Many hours, yeah. We're going to be off the hook then, and we'll get to go warm up. In that case, about 4 dozen soldiers who participated in the mutiny were summarily tried in a shed by their commanding officers and given minor charges of about 2 weeks forfeiture of pay. A dozen more were shackled together, and they faced a full court-martial hearing that proceeded over 5 days at the barracks in Vladivostok about a month later. But it took about 20 hours or so to get all the soldiers onto the ship, 18 or 20 hours, and it wasn't until 4:30 in the morning the next day, on December 22nd, that they actually sailed for Vladivostok on the ship SS Tista.
SS Tista. And just quickly, the big threat of the Bolsheviks was
that they were nationalizing private property. They declared the banks and the factories and the land to be social property. They repudiated Russia's foreign debt that was largely owed to British and French banks. They published the terms of the Allies' secret treaties, which had proposed to divvy up the spoils of the empire, and they also signed a unilateral peace agreement with Germany, which removed Russia from the war. So the Bolsheviks were this renegade socialist regime that were proposing a complete transformation of social and economic relationships. They were one of the first states, if not the first state in the world, to legalize abortion and to bring in programs like state-funded childcare. There were also darker aspects of the Bolshevik agenda, specifically relating to their lack of tolerance of dissent and repression of other democratic organizations in the country. But their economic and social agenda was far more progressive than anything the world had ever seen. And that invoked fear in the hearts of rulers from Victoria to Ottawa to Washington and London and Paris and Tokyo and everywhere in between. And that's why a dozen countries conspired to invade Russia shortly after the revolution to try to bring about regime change and restore privilege and autocracy in that country.
And do you get the sense that the mutiny soldiers knew that, and that's what they were?
Some would have been. They were mainly revolting against compulsory military service, so they had a lot of motives. Primarily, they were farmers from rural districts in Quebec who had been forced into the army against their will in the autumn of 1918. Well, primarily it was an economic concern. They were young farmers in their early 20s, young men who had cattle back at home. They had dairy farms. They had crops that may not have even been harvested. And they had families to provide for, big families in Quebec at that time, extended families, and they weren't able to work their farms. So that was the economic imperative that drove resistance to conscription among rural people in Canada. But then as they came here, they heard from labor speakers at these mass meetings downtown that they attended, with hundreds of soldiers attending these protest meetings. They bought the newspaper Red Flag, which was actively sold by the socialists to the troops. And that's where they heard some of these ideas about the Russian Revolution and the questioning of why was Canada sending troops to try to change the outcome of the revolution. So certainly that would influence the decision, but at its root it was a protest against conscription, soldiers who believed they had more important things to do than go open this whole new theater of war against the socialist government of Russia.
All right, so 2018.
And 2013 as well, every year, and building to 2018, the 100-year commemoration where we hope to install a plaque right here.
Right on.
And next year we'll be combining the walk and the ceremony.
Okay.
So thanks, Janine.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Ben.
Yes.
Rithet Creek is one of the main feeders into the north end of Sioux Lake.
Yes.
So
the same Rithet, and then
who was
Rithet's bog is over by Swan Lake there. I don't know. It's a good question. He must have owned the wharf there.
Yeah.
It was Rithet's Wharf and the Outer Wharves was what they also called it.
Yeah.
So there used to be a BC Transit bus that was called the Outer Wharf bus route, and so that's right at the Coast Guard station is where it used to be.
Well, maybe we'll find out.
Yeah, definitely. We'll take care of it.